Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Let's get back to the political stuff that isn't so much fun. I'd really like to do other fun stuff, and I was trying to think of something cooler to lead off with for tonight's podcast or for tomorrow's podcast. And there isn't. There's good and bad news in the 2A community, like there always is. Let's start with the bad. So FPC's Mock v. Garland, or not Mock v. Garland, Vanderstock v. Garland, they originally had the case vacated. This is the ghost gun rule, the frame and receiver rule that the ATF arbitrarily put out. And the case was originally vacated in the Fifth Circuit, the Texas Circuit. So basically the Texas, Louisiana, that circuit court. And the ATF couldn't take the L. So they took it to the SCOTUS. And SCOTUS, specifically, and Scalia, he took it, and he took it before the entire court because the ATF had asked for a way to stay the law indefinitely. And what Scalia did was take it to the actual full SCOTUS, and the SCOTUS parted ways with its normal self, its pro-gun stance. And we had two dissenters, Amy Coney Barrett and Gorsuch, I believe that's who it is, the two newest supposedly conservative justices on the Supreme Court, who actually sided with the left and said that the frame and receiver rule should be any decision should wait until that case is fully heard in the Fifth Circuit. Now, this raises some questions as to what happens with the pistol brace rule later on. And the bump stock rule, which both of those cases are in the SCOTUS right now and will be heard. It makes me wonder if we actually can count on what we should be able to count on. Up until this point with like the Bruin decision, we've had that kind of lead that kind of puts us in the good place. Now, again, I don't see this changing anything because I don't see people actually following this law because, Freeman don't ask permission anymore. And as I've said a couple podcasts ago where I was talking about where's your line, I think a lot of people in the 2A community specifically have reached that line a long time ago. And you can't see the stuff that's going on in the news. I mean, like the fact that a reporter can be beat down. He can take two of the people that beat him down to court. I'm talking about Andy Ngo's case. And the court basically vacates that decision and lets those two people go because the jurors are afraid to have an actual backbone and say something because they're afraid that those Antifa people will come for them. And they did. They went out and they continued to try, not just those people that were being tried, but Antifa in general went out and tried to dox the jury. And they have, I think one of the lawyers from the case actually got, that was on Andy Ngo's side, was actually had their car damaged, or one of the jurors. It's one of the two. On the bright side, and this comes from a weird place, Hawaii, which is kind of communist like California. They have a temporary stay right now on carrying guns in certain places. Now, that was ruled kind of 50-50 in my opinion. They still won't let you carry into state entities that you should be able to carry and defend yourself. And they said anything that's adjoined property that's owned by the county, you can't carry there. Or any private place, which is kind of what happens in New Mexico, that has it posted that you can't carry a gun. Or any establishment that has alcohol. Now, I'm kind of torn with the alcohol thing. Like if you have a restaurant that serves alcohol but you're not imbibing yourself, you should be able to carry a firearm to defend yourself. However, I understand the mindset, and I guess this is still part of that statusism that I've tried to kill, but this one it makes a lot of sense. Like, I have no problems with any substance you're going to use, but they don't mix with the 2A. Meaning that if you're under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, anything like that, you probably shouldn't be carrying or using a firearm at that instance. Does that mean you can't have it later? No, absolutely. You should be able to carry your firearm regardless of any substance you're on. And I'm that far into the woods there to say, it doesn't matter. Your rights are your rights. Using a substance doesn't preclude you from not carrying out your rights. The Constitution backs that up. However, the courts and the current legal system tell you if you're a habitual user of a controlled substance, anything that's Scheduled 1, you cannot own a firearm legally. Now, whether you do or not, that's on you. And I think I am perfectly okay with anyone owning a firearm if they use any substance, because there has been no historical precedence that says that they can't own a firearm if they use a substance. The federal government's the only one that has interceded there and says you can't. I do have a problem, like I said, operating heavy machinery. If you're tanked, look what danger you could have there. Same thing kind of happens with the 2A in my understanding and what I personally think. That if you're drunk, you probably shouldn't be carrying a gun and waving it around and brandishing it. You keep it in its safe until you're sober. That's the byline I have there. In the other stuff that's going on with the Hawaii stuff, oddly, they cited that butterfly knives are no longer illegal, and it became a 2A case because a butterfly knife is considered an arm, meaning like a gun or any other arm that you can bear. And they said that was illegal, that Hawaii banned them outright. I think that's interesting because, well, there are way more deadlier things than a butterfly knife or a switchblade. So to see that there are places that you can't have these makes no sense to me, because in the world that we live in, having any type of defense should be allowed. Whether it's a knife or it's a gun, whatever you choose to defend yourself with is on you and should perfectly be legal. Up to and including nuclear weapons as far as I'm concerned. I don't believe that you'll ever be able to bear a nuclear weapon because it's cost prohibitive. You have to keep those weapons charged, you have to keep them ready, so on and so forth. And the likelihood of you using something like that because you don't want to wipe out your neighbor, that makes a lot of sense too. But I think you should be able to, because if you read the clear text of the Second Amendment like I do, it says the rights of the people shall not be infringed to keep and bear arms, right? So, arms. Let's think about it in the context like they're telling us to with the Bruin decision, the historical context. What does that mean? Well, when our country was founded, privateers existed. That means that you could basically have cannons. You could get any arm that was the same that the federal government had at the time or any military had at the time, and it was perfectly legal. Our founding fathers knew that, and they didn't tell you couldn't do that. In fact, we have people that sailed under a letter of marque for our country to raid and plunder and pirate on behalf of our country that had those weapons back then. So to say that we can't own those firearms now or those arms now seems disingenuous, especially when the military has so many things that they could use against the populace. And they are. I mean, right now it looks like, just from an outsider, it looks like they're weaponizing the Department of Justice against American citizens. I wish I could say that in a popular way, but that's what literally looks like is happening. You can't look at what's happening with Trump, even though, like I said, not a huge fan of the Orange Man. It looks like they're gunning after him, and it looks like it's personal, not that they're doing it for any other reason than he's the opposition right now. They're turning the man into a martyr. Now, I think that's a double-edged sword for the left that they don't understand, that if they turn the Orange Man into a martyr, he's liable to win. I think that puts us in a different place, though, because I think some of those leftist people have lost their mind enough that they will rise up and do something stupid and riot and pillage and do things that will cause us to have to defend ourselves, even in small towns. That's why I have a little bit of heartburn that Trump hasn't just finally said, you know what, this isn't worth it. And what I mean by that is not that Trump shouldn't fight. I honestly think he should, because he's done nothing wrong. But I think Trump needs to realize that there is a group of people that strongly dislike the man, so much so, and it's irrational, that that's going to create a problem later on. And maybe there are better candidates that could get past that. That is, of course, if you have any hope for the American ideal. And a lot of people, some of my listeners included, have given up that hope a long time ago. That the America that we once knew is gone and that it's going to go away. I still cling to the hope that that's not the case. And when I see these little wins that we get here and there, it makes me perk up and get a little happier, like the Hawaii one. Basically, they stayed that where you can't carry firearms in certain places. I believe that'll eventually happen, though, because Hawaii is that guy. What else is concerning is the ATF going after... I don't know how else to put this. I'm trying to think about this. When we think about when you're private sales, that's the best way to put it. Private sales of firearms between people. The ATF is looking to put a rule out that actually ceases private sales completely. That, coupled with what we're seeing in the House and the Senate being proposed, I hope it doesn't get picked up, is that 1,000% tax, excise tax on firearms, because that specifically puts it out of the realm of a working person. And what I mean, it puts owning a firearm out of the realm of a normal person. When you take a $500 firearm, which is like median for a decent one nowadays, and you put 1,000% tax on it, now you're making it $5,000, right? How is that fair to a working man who just needs a piece of equipment, a tool to defend himself? Because they live in a more rural place where response times aren't there. I've told you guys this many times on the New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I listen to the police scanner. And in the last couple of days, they've had at least 2 calls that were over an hour long. Now, to me, that's unacceptable, and I would hope that the chief or someone in the city of Farmington hears this and does something about it, but there's not a lot of hope for it. And what I mean is when someone calls 911 or calls for service from law enforcement, that is their last hope in their eyes to get some sort of resolution to some issue. And for it to take an hour for them to actually respond to that call, that issue resolved itself one way or another in that time frame. Now, I understand that there's a lot of calls for service that they shouldn't have to deal with. And I'm the first one to say that, parents need to step up and be parents and not let their kids rule the household so much so that you have to call law enforcement to do what a parent should do. But at the same time, if things have gotten that far wrong in people's mind and they had to call law enforcement and they had a full hour for whatever issue to keep unfolding and keep going before service was even there, whether they called them or whether they showed up, that's an hour. The other thing I heard on the scanner, which I think is interesting, is that it was a medical call, but they had asked for law enforcement specifically, probably because this person would have respected law enforcement more than they would have respected the medical guys, the paramedics. But you literally heard the on-call supervisor say, we're not responding to that. Pass that back on to medical. The indifference that's happening with law enforcement is what's scary to me, but we saw that with COVID. And we know that the good law enforcement guys that were still in the forces have probably retired or left because of the demonization that's happened with law enforcement. So to me, this puts us back off to we're on our own. And if we're on our own, shouldn't I be able to get the best tool for the job, whatever I think it is? Shouldn't the rest of American citizens, be able to do that? If you can arbitrarily decide which call you're going to take and which call you're not going to take, It's already been decided in the courts that they have no obligation to defend you or protect you. So now you're hearing it on open radio chats with law enforcement. You can look up on radio reference radio frequencies for your local law enforcement agencies. And with that, you get to hear them talking on public radio. So you can hear the calls for services, how they're responding, what they're doing. And I'll be honest, 95% of the time, you hear them doing what they're supposed to do. They're there to help you. And I understand people get tired. And I understand they get tired of responding to the same type of call from the same type of person, because there's some people that are mentally unhinged that cannot think of any other resolution than to call law enforcement. But at the same time, when, like I just said before, when you have no resolution, when you have no other hope, and you're calling for law enforcement, because that's what a lot of the poor specifically do, is they know that that's their best hope for resolution for whatever issue they have. And that is disturbing to me, because I believe that we still have to be our own first responder, one. But these people have been coddled so much by the public as it is that they think that the law enforcement guys are going to be there to help them. Ferguson, when they called during the riots, and 911 literally told people that they had other issues to deal with, and now they got no calls for service, okay? That should be enough of a warning sign to you now, that unless it's the last thing you possibly could do, and that's how I take it myself, I'm not going to involve law enforcement, because they're not going to resolve the issue. I have to do it on my own. Now, that said, that doesn't mean be violent. That doesn't say be your own vigilante. That means be an adult. Try to talk to the people. Use your words, as I tell my kids, to get a resolution. What happens when that doesn't go there, though? And the words didn't have the desired effect. Now you're stuck with the legal system one way or another, whether you called for service or you're going to have to raise, a court case of some kind to get the ball rolling in whatever direction you need it to go. These are things that I think about as I read the news and bring things to you guys in New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. We're a small community, but I like to see it grow. And as I read through just the 2A news, because that's what I try to focus this on, and try to focus on the fun stuff more when I can, but I want to keep us informed, because that's a big deal. The fact that they're trying to backdoor a lot of these gun control things, like that 1,000% excise tax. How many people actually can say they've paid attention enough to know that that's a thing? Well, I hope that those that listen to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union and those that share NMBROU to everybody else, that you're sharing it so that other people can get that knowledge. Because by the time we end up having to go to, in New Mexico, like the roundhouse and actually fight it out, we could have killed some of this stuff before it ever became an issue. Calling your senators and your reps right now in the federal level probably would kill the excise tax stuff. I've sent emails, I've called, but that's because I'm trying to keep everyone informed, and that was the whole point of starting New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union, was to stop people from getting blindsided by these weird backdoor gun controls, these things that are going after your rights. And it's disheartening, to see so many bad things going on in the world. But at the same time, I'm seeing cool things too. There are sometimes you just have to get on Twitter or get on YouTube or get on Facebook or whatever you get onto and scroll for puppies and kitties or something to lighten the mood, because the world is a dark place and it's not getting any better in a lot of ways. But I hold out hope with the next generation. I see a lot of people talk mad smack about, Generation Alpha. And I have to say I don't, because I helped raise part of Generation Alpha. And having lunch with my son and his girlfriend today, it was kind of interesting in seeing that some of my views are reflected in my son's choice of girlfriend. That is awesome from a family or from a father's perspective, to see that they hold those views enough that they stick to people that have them. And believe it or not, there's still a lot of kids in that generation that are more, and they have more conservative leaning ideals, or more libertarian leaning ideals in this case, that is going to save our country eventually. The millennial generation is the one we need to worry about. They're the ones that are big enough to replace the boomers. And the boomers were the ones that kind of got us where we're at right now. When you look at the House and the Senate right now, and there are easily 20 or more people that are in their 80s making decisions for us, it's depressing, because if they're 80 years old, how relevant are their decision-making capabilities? And then, for my own personal experience, my dad was 79 years old when he passed, and he had dementia. My mom was 11 years younger, so she would have been 68 when she passed, and she had dementia. What about Dianne Feinstein? When she's in Congress still, and she's given a power of attorney to her daughter, but yet she's still making decisions at the federal level that affect us all. Mitch McConnell's over 80 years old too. Why do we have people in their 80s, and no offense to them, put them out to pasture, retire them, but why do we have people in their 80s making decisions for the majority of us Americans? And that's also goes for the federal, like the presidential races too. Biden's in his 80s right now. Trump will be 80 or 81 when he runs, if he wins the second term of office. I understand there's a difference in 80-year-olds. Some of them are smart as a tack and sharp as all get out. But it's time that we start letting Gen X back in, which we're small, and let the older generation go out to pasture. Now, I've ranted about the good or the bad, and I've ranted about the kind of depressing. But what's cool that's been coming out in the 2A? I'm seeing more innovation than I should have thought possible. There's a new cartridge. I haven't done the book work on it yet to see more about it. I'm guessing it's probably going to be something in the 6mm range, just like all the new stuff it seems to be, which I think is kind of funny that all the new stuff is coming out in 6mm, which has been around since like the 1800s, the late 1800s. 6.5 by 55 Italian or Swedish has been a thing for a long time. And to see the 6.5 Creedmoor come out, which is basically a little bit more of a modernized version of a 6.5 by 55, where the rediscovery is, there's still old dudes like me, a Gen Xer like me that looks at that stuff and goes, well, it's not really that new, but it's interesting what you're doing with it. I think that the new stuff that we're seeing in the innovative spaces, Tim at Military Arms Channel released a video yesterday about a new 308 battle rifle that's coming out. It has a lot of parts compatibility with an AR-10. What is old is new again. Again, we're seeing 308 battle rifles, or 308 semi-automatic rifles, more specifically, coming out. And why? It's because some of those things that those boomer dudes like my dad said are true. A 5.56 at 5 and 600 yards, can it do it? Absolutely. Can it do it reliably to take game? No, not even close. Not a big game? No way. But a .308 can. And if you're having to provide for your family, there's some legitimate use cases for a semi-automatic battle rifle. And if you can only afford one rifle, why not use something like that? So those are where I see the hopeful pieces, is the new innovation and stuff. I look at like Print, Shoot, Repeat. I mentioned him on here a couple times. I look at those guys in the 3D print community, because the stuff they're doing is kind of anarchist, but at the same time, it's kind of where the future of firearms is going. The fact that the law can't stop any of that stuff, because you can't stop a signal and you can't stop a file. And if you could, then Napster would have not been the end of the music store that we knew. You know, the music store now is on your phone, and you're only streaming it. Why? It's because they couldn't stop people from sharing files, no matter how hard they tried. And that's where I see that anarchist piece that makes me love it, because it's negating the government's involvement. No matter what the government tries to do, you can't stop that. And that innovation is something that's going to resonate in the future. You know, you see people willingly giving up their rights because they say they have nothing to hide. Well, this isn't about having anything to hide. This is about, I shouldn't have to give you that information for any reason. You have no need for it. So why should I give it to you? Mindless ramblings of Sean. And some pieces of information for you to keep you abreast of what's going on in the 2A community. I'll keep you up on Vanderstock v. Garland, which is the frame and receiver rule. I'll keep you abreast of the situation with the pistol braces for those of you that actually care. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Be great.
In the top, I can't let it slide. My politics are rather controversial. Who would have thought that I ain't catching all slack?